Um, I give it another minute. All right. Oh, I have to start the webinar. All right, here we go. Webinar starting.
Okay.
All right, back to you, Doug. Sorry.
Okay. Cool. All right. So let's get my, here we go. So this was just, changes with the bird protocol, still bird protocol stuff, habitat, talked about that, some frog stuff, nature counts. Um, I don't even know if we talked about this last time, Kathy, but anyway, we're going to develop some guidelines for using automated recording units, which is what ARUs are for frogs, because a lot of folks are starting to use ARUs for frogs nighttime, especially in urban areas where it's sort of starting to be unsafe to do stuff at night. A lot of organizations are starting to use these units. They're programmable. You stick them out, they record. They have really sensitive microphones, like it produces amazing sound. It's as if you're actually there doing a point count. And then you can listen to the recordings later. And so we're going to develop some guidelines so that we can use those data to basically kind of produce as if you had been there in person, doing the point count yourself, so that we can get ARU frog data into the MMP database. Okay, I said I wouldn't do that, but I did it anyway.
I don't
Okay.
think you covered it last time, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more common, and I think we don't want to miss those data. So there is we think we can put together guidelines that will create data that will be, like apples to apples, so to speak, with all the other frog data we already have and that we collect in person. That's the idea anyway. Okay, so here's the number that you can see down in the bottom there, recent science number one. So there's 9 of these. And these are papers that we've published using Great Lakes MMP data in the last 5 years or so. So this one's 2021 paper. And this, when we're going through these examples, like this is what we use the MMP data to do. These are examples of what we do with it, right? Um, Citizen science program, folks like yourselves collect all these data. And the idea is we try to use the data as much as we can to produce science products that then make conservation happen on the ground. And so each one of these are a nice example of the actions or the impact that the data you collect has down the line. So areas of concern, these are areas that are identified throughout the Great Lakes in both Canada and the US under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that are places that have usually some kind of pollution or some kind of problem that needs fixing. And the Toronto and region area of concern is one of them. There's about 30 some odd of these areas throughout the Great Lakes. And one of the prime functions of the Great Lakes MMP, both bird and frog and habitat data, is to monitor wildlife in these areas of concern and be able to use the data to decide if things have become healthy enough to delist the area as an area of concern or not. And in these areas of concern, there's all kinds of remedial actions going on, restoration and trying to make things better, repair the damage that's in these areas. And you need to be able to, assess whether you've done enough to be able to say it's not an area of concern anymore. And so the MMP is really well suited to this, because we collect this standardized data throughout the whole basin, right? So we have lots of monitoring stations in the AOC, and we have a bunch that are outside too. And so you can compare how things are doing both within and outside an AOC within a particular year and across years, because we've got like this wonderful standardized data within and across years, right? And this is golden. This is why the program is so powerful for this kind of stuff. So you can see in the graphic there, they had some bird and frog monitoring stations throughout the Toronto and region area of concern. And then they compared what was sort of going on within the AOC to their reference wetland, which is off to the reference area, which is off to the east there in the Duffins Creek watershed. And so you can decide, have we done enough? Is the marsh bird and frog community healthy enough that we can delist? And I think I mean, it's a mixed message. Uh, Things are decent compared to the reference watershed, but obviously, urbanization is so rampant in the Toronto area that, there's still huge negative effects of urbanization on these animals. So it's sort of a mixed bag. But I think the take home message really is that this is the power of the MMPs. And I think, and I won't go on with this too much, but what I really like about this kind of example is if you're wondering, you say you do one route and maybe your route only has a few stations on it, and you're kind of like, well, it's only three stations. Like, is it really making a difference? Am I really helping here with just these three measly stations? Well, yeah, you are, because it's the power is the whole network of all these hundreds of stations throughout the whole Great Lakes, and that we're all collecting the data in the same manner. Because your three stations go into this kind of stuff. And when you combine it with everybody else's stations, it's really, really powerful. So think about this kind of stuff when you're wondering if your stations make a difference, because they really do. Any, I'll just maybe stop there. Are there any questions, Kath? I can't see the chat or the Q&A anymore the way
We
I have my
don't
screen set up.
have
So,
we don't have any questions right now, but
okay,
I
that's okay.
recall we had a question about are street stations any good that was sent to us, and I'm wondering if you're looking at on a single wetland level, like if you're just looking at general species in a single wetland through time, like there is value in the marsh monitoring on their own research, but if they're looking for species at risk, they have to ramp it up a little, do they not?
It can help, like as you know, like if we're talking birds, for example, there's the optional third visit, right? The standard is two visits, but you can do the third visit. And if you really want to, have a better chance of capturing all the species that are there, especially species at risk, birds that are more rare than the more common species, and therefore that extra visit ups your odds of detecting them if they're there. Um, but to answer the question, like if you have three stations in a wetland, I think it, and I think the question was, can we do trends with that? And I think, like statistically speaking, I think was specifically the question, which, can we apply a statistical test so that over the years with those three stations, can we say if there's a statistically significant difference? I think that's what the question is really getting at. And the answer is kind of yes and no. I mean, you can apply statistics to anything, right? But with only three stations, you're not going to have a lot of power. So you're probably not going to find a significant difference, even if there was one, right? Because you don't have the power. And you have to think about experimental design and statistics and stuff like that. And like replication is the big thing, right? And you have three replicates, and you're like, well, is it really three replicates? Or is it just subsampling three stations within one wetland? And what's really the unit of measure and all this kind of stuff? And this is stuff that statisticians get excited about. It's kind of dull if you're not into the math. But so long story short, I think the answer is yeah, I think you can look at meaningful differences over time with only three stations in a wetland, but you might not be able to apply a formal statistical test to it to test statistical significance because you've got sample size three. And some people might even say you've really got a sample size of one because you're really subsampling just one wetland. But I don't know that you really necessarily need to apply a statistical test. I think you could just look at the raw data. You
Yeah,
know,
you're
what
almost doing like a whole like a statistical text is all about a subsection of the reality of life. But if your reality is just that one wetland and you had 10 different species and you go down to five different species, that to me is true data. That tells you something.
yeah.
Now, somebody said, how would the size of the wetland influence how well three stations cover it? That makes a big difference. If
Yep.
it's really, really large, obviously, three stations are not going to cover well. But equally difficult, if it's just a little bit too big, you can't get two stations in one that's like, say, only 600 meters or 400 meters wide. So it does make a difference. Again, I don't know if it makes a big deal when you're doing your analysis later
Yeah.
because you got a good sample anyways.
These are really good questions, and for those of us who are really like get excited about statistical design and the math that goes into this kind of stuff, you get really into this. But like this kind of question has, how many stations per wetland and what coverage? These these questions are like age-old questions with respect to experimental design. And it really depends on the scale of the question you're trying to answer. So, say you're imagining, okay, I have this wetland, and yeah, I've got three stations in it, but you're thinking, should I do more or whatever? Or could I get away with less? Right? And it depends on your question. If you're If you're most interested in collecting data to say, make inferences, as we say, across the entire lower Great Lakes, then you might actually be best to only put one station in your wetland and use the remaining effort that you can spend going to other wetlands because your statistical power is going to go up. And the other question too is, okay, I can decide how many stations I put in a particular wetland, but how many visits do I make to those stations? Should I do 2 visits, or would it be best to do 3 visits at those 3 stations? Or if I only do 2, that means I have time left to do more stations. So what's better? And if you're trying, basically the rule of thumb is if your question you're trying to answer is across really broad scales, like all of Southern Ontario or all of the lower Great Lakes, you're better off to have more stations in more wetlands and visit them fewer times. In fact, there is a paper out there that says if you're trying to do trend modeling for a species of bird over the years, you should only put one station and no more than 3 in any wetland, no matter the size, and you should only visit it once per year, not even 2. They say go once and use your extra time to do more stations in other wetlands because that's where the power is for your statistical test at a broad scale. Now, if you want to maybe you don't want to make inferences. Maybe the question that you're trying to answer is not at a broad scale. It's not across Southern Ontario, and it's not across the Lower Great Lakes. You want to make, conclusions or inferences about your one wetland. Then the answer is totally different. And there's been some work done on this. There's actually an internal Canadian Wildlife Service paper that was done in 2006, and I'm working on a paper now that's sort of expanded on that and is looking at the same question. So we're going to have some information on this soon, where it says if you want to make conclusions about one particular wetland, especially if it's big, you should put stations in it in a systematic grid throughout the whole wetland, 250-meter grid. And you try to go to every intersection and put a station in to basically blanket your wetland. And that makes sense, right? Because you're like, I want information on this one particular wetland. Well, you just flood it with like stations as well as it'll fit. And then you're going to get lots of information on basically a full coverage of the wetland. So it really depends on your question, how many stations per wetland and how many visits you make. It's like, what's the scale of what you're really trying to get an answer to? Sorry, that's my long-winded answer, but
It
I get
is.
excited about this stuff. I work with this stuff
Yes.
every day. So
And now we have some questions coming in, but I think if you have a lot to share, you're going to run out of time.
yeah,
So
how about should we
you
move
better
along
get
to the next
going.
one? Okay, all right. I'll try to spend less time on each one. In the true spirit of a chat, we didn't prepare. Well, we prepared slides, but we didn't prepare anything about what we were going to say. So,
We will
which
get
with
to some
Kathy and I can be
questions.
dangerous. So,
We'll get to some questions. Doug doesn't get to talk all night tonight. So
okay,
we'll get to some questions. Go ahead, Doug.
yeah, stop me and I'll take questions at any time. But okay, this one was a really cool study that Kristen Bianchini, she was wonderful to work with, really talented statistician. Um, So what we were talking about power, right? And when you're talking about trying to make inferences across, say, all of Southern Ontario or all of Lower Great Lakes, like a big broad scale, and you're trying to do trends, one way to increase your power is, okay, we have all this MMP data for birds. What if we brought in data from other broad scale bird monitoring data sets and put them together? Would that increase our power? Give us better ability to identify and measure trends. So that's what we did here. We combined the Great Lakes MMP for birds with the breeding bird survey, that's what BBS is there, and with eBird data. And the quick answer is if you mix Great Lakes MMP with eBird data, especially, it's really worthwhile. It really boosts your power to detect these trends, and that's what the combined is on the right. That's actually all 3. Breeding bird survey is actually not that great for marsh birds. It's a road-based roadside survey. Roads tend to avoid wetlands. You, by definition, don't get very many detections of marsh birds. So I think we could actually even just leave the BBS out of it. You can put it in, you can leave it out. You basically get about the same answer. But there's so much data with eBird. Combining it with Great Lakes MMP in the future, I think it's probably a good way to go. But don't worry, eBird on its own won't do it either. You need both because eBird is what we call a semi-structured bird monitoring program. people can do it wherever they want, whenever they want. It's not like MMP where there's strict rules. Here's where a station has to be in a marsh by this definition, and you have to go at these dates, and do this. This is very standardized, the Great Lakes MMP. So we need standardized monitoring like the MMP, so we sort of can feel confident like this is really the actual trend. And if we bring the eBird data in that's kind of shifty because people can do it wherever they want, whenever they want, when we bring that in and add it to the MMP, if we still kind of get the same answer, but we have better precision, like we're more confident, our confidence intervals are narrower. We are more likely to identify a statistically significant trend if it's there by bringing in the eBird data, but we're not biasing things by changing our trend very much, then we're good to go. So that's what this study basically says. And the math and the statistics for how to combine Great Lakes MMP data with eBird data, we kind of did it, I'll suffice to say, kind of like on the back of a serviette kind of math. We did it real simple, like as simple as you can do, just to sort of see what it would be like when we combine these data. But there are much more sophisticated ways, really sophisticated statistical models that are just being developed now for how to combine data sets like this. And there's a bunch of different choices. And we're kind of waiting for the statisticians to kind of decide what's the best way to combine data sets like this. And once they kind of figure that out, then I think we'll just every year we're going to combine eBird data with the Great Lakes MMP data as sort of a regular matter of course. And now that we have all our data in our nature count system, eBird and MMP and BBS and whatever else we want to integrate together, we can automate all this kind of stuff and it'll be really, really kind of cool.
One more, Doug.
Sorry. Hopefully people are finding this interesting. Okay, what do we have next? Oh yeah, this one's really cool. So this again really illustrates the power of MMP data and should make you feel really good about the effort that you put in to gathering the data. So MMP, we've got like 30 years of data now, right? It started in 1995, remember? Um, and so here, what we did is now that we have data across so many years, we were able to match it with some of the remote satellite sensed land cover data from the Solaris system, which is the Southern Ontario Land Resource Information System, Solaris for short. And that's what these four date ranges are. So the first slice for that land cover product is 2000 to 2001, and then there's another slice 2005 to 6 and so on. And of course, we have MMP data from each of those four time slices now. And for a lot of those, the same station across two or more of those four slices, which is gold because what we were able to do with this study is imagine one particular MMP station. It's Ontario 592 Station A, for example, or whatever. We might have data from that station from 2001 or 2000 or 2001, as well as 2005, 2006. And it got surveyed again in 2010, 2011. Like we have data all the way along. And from the Solaris data, we know how the landscape around that station has changed. Is there more urban sprawl within a certain distance, or is there more agriculture or less forest and more roads? Like you can get that from the solars. So remember we're talking about statistics and power to detect changes. When you have the same station sampled across those time slices, you can do some really powerful math to link the changes in the marsh birds directly to what's changing in the landscape around the station. Way more powerful than any other way you can do because you're mathematically linking the changes in the birds to the concurrent changes in the surrounding landscape from the satellite remote sense data. And that's really powerful, like way better than anything else you can do. And we can only do this because we have wonderful MMP data from folks like yourself who collected it for us over the last 30 years. So we did this, long story short, like it shows what you would expect, urban sprawl is bad when you do that around a marsh for marsh birds. It's better if you leave more natural habitat forests. Like it's exactly what you'd think. There was no unexpected result. But the beauty of the study is it's really tight statistically. Like it's really convincing for people who are into statistics because they're like, whoa, okay, this really is this really is the real deal. Like urban sprawl is really bad for this stuff. You can't do that within a certain distance. And we were able to do it in different buffers, like we went out to 6 kilometers or something like this in every direction from a station, measuring how much urban sprawl there is and stuff like that. So really powerful. And if I want to do two in one, Kathy, the next one is we did the
Go.
same thing for frogs. So I don't need to describe this one because it's exactly the same thing, but we did it for frogs. And this one I just finished the draft of this a couple weeks ago. We haven't even submitted this one yet. But so we got a bird paper and we've got a sister paper for it now. It'll come out soon for frogs. And it says the same thing, don't build houses right next to a marsh. Basically what it says but in a really strong, convincing way that nobody's really been able to do before. So we can use this as one of our tools to, demonstrate that we shouldn't do this stuff next to a marsh. Okay, I'll stop for
Very
now for a bit.
well, very, very interesting. And I should mention to everybody that the Birds Canada Communications is going to put a blog out. Did they give you a date for that, Doug, for the blog?
Yes, I think it's going to come out in May sometime.
And that's about all the power and all the wonderful actions to conservation that has come out of the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program. So look forward to that. If Doug has time, I'll let him loose to do some more later. But we better get to
Yeah,
all
no
these
problem.
questions we're getting asked, and I'm going to start with um, one that. Do you want to stop sharing, Doug's?
Yes, I will do that.
Um, I'm going to start with a couple simple ones. Like Doug gets to do all the cool stuff. I'm going to do really simple things here. So I'm hoping you guys can see a really cool graphic. Can you see it, Doug?
Yep, it's up.
So the one of the questions we had was how many frog species are there? And I'm going to make you guys work a little bit. I'm going to ask you guys what's missing in this list. But this particular item covers more than just the frog species. It really explains to you the time frames of these species. And this is from a bit of more of a northern climate. You see it's got the boreal chorus frog and not the western that we have in half of our survey range. But let's have a listen. Oh boy, I have to remember how to. Oh, I don't have to make sure that you guys can. I gotta stop share here. Maybe you could answer another question while I figure this out. Um, this is a question, Doug. It's from Anonymous. I'm a bit unsure on when I should conduct my first amphibian survey visit. I'm located on the 45th parallel. So does that mean I should go by the central region date range provided in the handbook, considering conditions are suitable? I think the changeover is 47 degrees, isn't it, Doug, for this
I,
one?
I can't remember off the top of my head. Um, I mean, if you're right on the break point between the two, you could probably kind of average them in your head. Take something midway. Um, if you're, I think the best way is like if you're in doubt for frog first visit, and this happens to me too. It's happened even this year. Um, I think the best way, if this won't apply to everybody, but if you have a wetland near your house that's not too far to go, and you're familiar with the frogs that are normally there, and you know that nothing's happened this year in that wetland from previous years, it's the same kind of land use around it, and half of it hasn't been plowed under or anything like that. If you're hearing the species there that you're expecting, then generally in the area, probably things are ready to go. So I use that as sort of a test. Like I'm kind of lucky because I can hear frogs in a wetland from my back deck. So I'm kind of spoiled. I can just step out on the back deck and I'm like, oh yeah, there's strong peeper chorus going. I'm good to go. And so I get in the car and off I go. But not everybody will have that, I realize, but that's like a surefire way. If you have a local wetland, like maybe there's a wetland, maybe it's only a third of the way to your first stop, and you can stop there and you're like, okay, yeah, there's, lots of chorus frogs or wood frogs, whatever you'd normally get there. I'm probably good. And then you keep going the rest of the way because they're up and going.
So I don't know if I'm going to have this to work, but we're going to try it. You guys can tell me if you can hear this um, after I share it. All right, just share. Share sound. There we go. That's what I need. Share sound. Oh, it's not letting me share sound for some reason. Now, why is that? Well, we'll see if it works. Now, can anybody hear this? Can you hear it, Doug?
No.
No. Oh, I am so disappointed with that. Um, share sound. So I'm gonna take that off.
Your the volume for that particular window isn't muted, is it?
No, I
No.
can hear it loudly on my stuff.
Aha.
So we may just not be able to do the fun stuff, which is disappointing. Um, I see the option right here to share sound and it won't let me. But what I wanted to share was just this idea, how many frogs species are there in the Great Lakes Basin? Um, so somebody can hear, oh, I can hear it on my stuff. Okay, I've got closed captioning working too. Um, so I'm gonna get rid of the share here. Can stop sharing. So what I wanted to share is that we have 12 species in the Great Lakes Basin for the number of frogs, because it was a very simple question. It was how many species are there, and there are 12 species. And I'll share the link to that frog phonology with everybody. Um, and but most locations you see 10, and if you, I will show you another graph in a second, and you'll see on the graph what happens is they spread themselves out through time. So it's very easy to tell what you can hear when, um, depending on what you're doing. So you'll see here on the graph, they spread themselves out. So you have your early spring ones, then you have your middle spring ones, and then you have late spring ones. Now, does anybody recall which ones are not on there? Maybe somebody does remember and can put them on the chat. And the next couple questions relate to this as well. And I'm going to try to get those up. All right, the next one is the idea about timing and temperature. What if you go out surveying and it was at the right temperature when you started, but was not when you finished? And Doug and I pretty much use the same way. Like those, first off, the yes, mink frog is missing. That is a good one. What else is missing is Blanchard's cricket frog. Pickerel, you know what? Pickerel, I didn't even think about pickerel. It's 13 species I'm up to now. And Fowler's toads. So we got Blanchard's cricket frog, pickerel frog, mink frog, Fowler's toads, and of course Western chorus frog, which sounds just like the boreal chorus frogs. You can't tell them a different by call. Um, so that's great catches, guys. But it's those temperatures, just like the dates, they're kind of a gauge of the best time to survey, and they were created 20, 30 years ago now. And we know that the world has changed. So keep that in mind. And we see the change more so because seeing that the species move around. And we still feel that the best way to know when to survey is if they're calling and you can hear them call, go out and survey. And I think Doug just said that as well. And some people who cannot survey based on that because they're in an urban jungle, I hear you. I just don't have a better answer for you. As far as we know, it depends on water temperature. If the water temperature is hot, but the air is cold, they'll still call. If the water temperature is cold and the air is warm, they won't call as well. So it's all over the place. And one tool to go with that I wanted to share is this one here, which is called the Wonder Map. And I'm going to have to stop sharing and bring up another map to show you this.
Just while you're bringing that up, I'll just add in a couple things. Like
Yep.
I think one of the big issues is like 30 years ago when the rules for Great Lakes MMP frogs was set. Like I think the weather patterns in spring was usually like it warms up gradually and then all of a sudden the nights are sort of above 5 and they kind of stay that way, right? more or less. But now we get these yo-yo swings, and this has happened to me here at Long Point this year already. Like, you get 3 days and it's plus 10 or warmer at night. And then it's like for 4 nights, it's below zero again. And then it's back warm. And then it's below zero again. And it's back and forth. And that's what's really causing havoc, I think, with us especially trying to figure out when to go for your first frog visit, because you're like, well, has it been warm enough long enough to get them going for what we normally want from the MMP? Because, like, one night of warmth when it was, if it was -5 for the last week and all of a sudden it's plus 10 for one night, it might not really warm things up fast enough to really get the calling we want. So our rules are breaking down and not working very well. So as Kathy says, the best way is like, if you're getting the frogs that you expect at sort of the chorus number, the intensity or whatever you want to say, that you're expecting, then you're probably good to go. Another thing I wanted to add in was, if say you've got a route that's like, 8 stations long or whatever, and you start at station one at the beginning of the evening and it's, plus 12 or whatever, but or it's, whatever it is, and the temperature starts to drop, and before you finish your route, it's like 4 plus 3 or 4 or something. I just say you only have one station or two left,
Keep
and
going.
it's a long way to come back. I would just finish it. You like, especially if the frogs are calling the way you'd expect. I know it's like you're like, but hey, you're telling us to bend the rules here. Like, this is a little shifty, but I think it also has to be practical. Like, I wouldn't necessarily skip that last visit or last station because it's down to +4 and have to drive back, the following week, the whole 2 hour round trip to do that one last station. I just squeak it in. Anyway, that's one thing I wanted to add in.
I would say, being the one who has to do the risk management here, do not turn around and go back to the shore as soon as you start hearing the thunderstorms. We don't want you out in those. Just to be safe. Now, everybody can see the map that I have up right now.
We can't see your screen, Kathy.
Oh, maybe I should share here. This is called the Wonder Map. Literally, it's called the Wonder Map.
It's coming
And
up
what
now.
and what it is an online. It's called the Wonderground. It's the underground of weather. And I was introduced to this by a landscaper quite a while ago. And what it is a network of all the home weather systems. So maybe you can't get to your station early enough at the right time. This may help you because you may go in and say, "Oh, look it, my station is near here," and you click on it, and it will tell you what the conditions are like there. So it's another tool that can be at your disposal to help you with that. And it's just because I have surveyed an hour from my home when I started in this job, and I know how difficult it is to meet those times. Um,
Another couple tips. I also use a site called windy.com.
Windy,
Yeah,
yes.
windy.com is really nice. I think it's based on like standardized weather data or whatever, but it's the same kind of thing. You can really detail. It's got like wind or direction, speeds, stuff like that. If you're doing anything in Great Lakes coastal wetlands, Environment Canada marine forecasts, and you can actually look at their marine buoys that'll give you wind speeds out in the Great Lakes, which is really useful for trying to gauge what it's like at a coastal wetland. Because like to give you an example, if you do stuff around the Great Lakes, like we're here in Port Rowan, right on the edge of Lake Erie, my house is about a half a kilometer from the shore. And I can step out on my back deck and it is dead calm. Like there is not a twig moving. I'm like, okay, good to go. And I drive down to the lake shore and it's really windy. It's only half a kilometer away. Like the lake is a totally different beast. So you can sometimes save yourself a long drive and disappointment by using these sites, these
Yeah.
websites.
I just put up the windy one. Now we have a few more questions. Um, Let me just unshare. Um, Questions are coming in. I just have to find them. I'm discovering I cannot copy them over to the Q&A or else I would. Um, One question was, what is considered a part of the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Project? And that's from Teresa. And Teresa, anything that is within the Great Lakes watershed and the Ottawa watershed right now is considered part of the project. Now, we have had things done in the Arctic watershed, but it's pretty rare, and it's more of a case that they would like to see that data collected and stored in a standardized situation. That would be used, I think, in some analysis, Doug, but tossed out of other ones because we code everything to the watershed. We also code every marsh in our background work here, how close it is to the coastal sites. And don't undervalue those sites. We also have had some analysis that showed interior sites are quite important for birds, aren't they?
Yes, yes. So the Great Lakes coastal versus the inland question is a really interesting thing. And I won't say why because we'll need another webinar for that. I don't want to take up too much time. But think about it, like there are other programs that monitor marsh birds and frogs over the long term, like the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program, which is not a Birds Canada program. It's a US EPA program that actually samples in Canada. But it's all Great Lakes coastal. Long story short, I just want to say the Great Lakes MMP is the only long-term marsh bird and frog monitoring program that samples inland wetlands in the Great Lakes. And that is a huge feather in our hat. I use that to sell the program all the time. But also us also sampling coastal wetlands is important because then we're doing inland and coastal the same way, and there's some really interesting stuff. That's why I've been putting the coastal versus inland in the Marsh Monitor in our newsletter now as a automated. I've automated it all now because like those differences are really key. Like for least bittern, for example, we're doing a whole paper on least bitterns in the next couple of years. I've got a proposal in for money for that, and really interesting differences. So if we didn't have MMP data from you wonderful folks that collect all this wonderful data at both inland and coastal wetlands, we wouldn't be able to answer these questions. And it's the least bittern stuff is really interesting, but I think it's going to be interesting over like dozens of species. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and you got to remember these watersheds are huge. Like Teresa's in Thunder Bay, so she's getting close to the Arctic watershed as well. But I'll add a link that shows how big those watersheds are. So there's a lot involved. And like I said, we also do the Ottawa River watershed net as well. And keep in mind that we're not the only marsh monitoring program. Our data collates very well into the Quebec Marsh Monitoring Program, which is going to be in the St. Lawrence watershed. I think it's going to be at the St. Lawrence or Arctic, right?
Yep. So
Yeah.
that least bittern paper I'm talking about, we're going to combine Great Lakes MMP with Quebec MMP data. Because remember, we all use the same protocol. That's the beauty of it. It's apples to apples, and we can get lake level, well, river level data from the St. Lawrence monitoring stuff. So we're going to be able to look at lake levels, coastal versus inland, whole 9 yards. It's going to be sweet.
I should mention to you, Doug, that we have had compliments about you sharing the stats. Doug does fantastic works for us, and the knowledge that he shares, not only on a popular level, but in a scientifically level, is phenomenal. And so it's great having you on board to talk about these things.
I'm really
Um,
glad to hear that. And if you're really into the science stuff, the that blog that's going to come out in May that Kathy mentioned that I wrote, um, basically what I tried to do with that is give an exhaustive but brief overview of all the science that's come out of the Great Lakes MMP all time over the whole 30 years. And I tried to break it down as to how that's making a difference for these animals on the ground. So that's if you're wondering about the whole picture, wait for the May blog.
Now, I have other questions that were sent to us earlier, but Chris has an interesting question. I'm in the extreme southwest. We have had a cold and windy spring. I had to wait to visit until April 12th. No frog still. Should I repeat or wait until second visit time? Well, both Doug and I survey in the extreme south. And on Lake Erie, which Chris is on, I think he's in the Detroit River watershed, or Doug. It's the same thing. It's difficult to match that timing. We're starting to move into second visit frogs here, right, Doug? You've heard them the other night.
I haven't done my second visit yet. Um, it's been warm enough some nights, but um, usually I like to wait until I hear toads, American toads, because that's one of the targets for the second visit, and I haven't heard toads yet. So,
No, I haven't either. And um,
to answer your question though, like if this is this a site where you know there's usually frogs and you didn't get any? Because that would be a bit of a flag to me. But if this is a new site and you're not sure what to expect, then it is what it is, especially if you're hearing frogs in the general area.
Chris is, if I recall, and Chris can correct me on this, he's in a remnant wetland on probably Big Creek Marsh, but don't quote me on that, might be Canard River in the AOC, in the Detroit River AOC. So the quality of the site's not great. I would think tree frogs are quite rare there.
Yeah, it might be that it's a legitimate um, absence of frogs. And we have lots of sites like that in sort of crummy spots, especially for the early breeders. Like we have some spots where later on, like there's lots of green frogs there, but like we don't get anything on the first visit because there's no peepers. Peepers are more sensitive to some of the pollutants and contaminants and stuff than green frogs are. Green frogs seem to be like, I hate to say them,
Everywhere.
I call them the cockroaches, the frog
Yes.
world. Like, and it matches when you look at the contaminants literature where they've measured what green frogs can handle, they seem way less sensitive to contaminants they can pick up from pollution in the water than the other species. So it makes sense that like green frogs are like the last frog standing. They're much more robust to some of this stuff. So
And we should mention that we have these 12, 13 frogs. Now I've forgotten how many, so that's sad. I've been doing this too long. Um, you're not going to get them on every wetland. And I know some people get concerned because they may only get 3 or 4 species, but remember that we have this prevalence of urban wetlands that have had damage to them. And we have wetlands that are specific to certain types of frogs. Like the site that Doug and I survey, um, as he says, you don't get a lot of those coarse frog. I don't think I've ever heard wood frog there. But we do get, which other people don't get, which is phenomenal, is Fowler's toads in full chorus, which are quite cool. So it's all going to depend on where you are. And remember that you're not competing your marsh against the other marshes. We don't want the best marshes. We want all the marshes so we get a true picture. So even if you're only getting 1 or 2 species, that's very relevant. It's boring for you, but it's very relevant. Enjoy the sunset. Um,
yeah, I'd say it's quite normal to only get, say, two or three species. Probably green frog, spring peeper, they're the most widespread.
yeah. Now, we have one question, and we were talking about this question earlier, Doug. At times, usually on the last survey, I hear many frogs calling, but can't differentiate between the species. How do I indicate that there are many frogs, but don't know which one? Do you want to take this on, or you want me to give my answer idea
Oh,
first?
you go first.
If you can identify the frogs, don't write it down. But remember that even if you, it's tough, but you have stereo. So you might be able to catch 1 or 2 frogs close up. And chances are those frogs that you're hearing close may also be the ones you're hearing in the distance. So just identify what you can hear. And take your time. 3 minutes is a long time for counting like 4 species of frogs. So you have the time to do it in.
Another trick that might work is if you can make a recording with your phone, bring it home with you and play it and compare it to recordings that are on the web. You might be able to figure some of it out that way. I hear you though. Sometimes, that third visit, you have this wall of sound in some places, like a crazy green frog, bullfrog chorus, and there might be tree frogs too, and even other species, and it can be tough trying to weed out what all the species are that are there. But just try your best, and it's okay to miss. Like it happens. You don't necessarily get everything that's there, but try your best to get everything that's there.
Somebody just asked, is there a resource like Merlin for frogs? No, not that I'm aware of. Now, probably there's Wild Tracks is probably working on an algorithm to do it, but it's not for public consumption yet. That's a professional ARU company where they work with recording sounds. But my experience with Merlin even is it does not like noise. and it does not like too much. It can only pick up one call at a time. So when you're getting those massive code threes, it's not going to pick up anything. It's just going to say it's too noisy out there if it's that same style of algorithm. So I don't see a, I don't know if it'll, have you ever seen really good programming that identifies frog, Doug?
No, I mean, there's no reason why we can't develop this stuff. We have the recordings and we can use machine learning. Maybe we just need to start somebody down the road to do it. Um, if you're one site, and I can put the if I'm sophisticated enough here, I can put the link in the chat. But there's a site called Xenocanto, Xeno-Canto.org. And it's basically a bunch of wildlife sounds. So you can go there, type in whatever species of frog you want and listen to all kinds of recordings on there, which can be a sort of bit of a library.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's also very techy. So that's why I don't normally share it too heavily. Um, I spend time on it though. So what questions are next? We're now to tips. So tips. I'm just gonna go with the classics. Trust your ears. What you're hearing, I have a bad I have a bad habit of not trusting myself, especially for the first frogs of the year. So, especially for the people like Teresa and many of the others who've been doing this for years, if you think it's a bullfrog and you've heard it enough and it makes absolute sense with the range and the location and the time of the day and the time of the year, then it likely is a bullfrog. So trust your skills because you have them and you have the capacity to be trained on them with all the materials that you've been provided. Watch the weather, of course. Then the guidance. Take a friend. I can't overemphasize how many of these wetlands that we survey are very public and in urban areas, yet at the same time very remote. So having somebody with you is great, especially if you do have a problem out there. Like if you have to explain to somebody on the phone how to get to you on your wetland, it's just easier to have somebody to send for help. And use the training tools that we have available. Now, Doug, next, do you have any tips to share?
Um, I don't think so. Um, I noticed there's one question here. I'm just noticing that maybe I should answer quickly. Becca asked, should we pay more attention to nighttime temperatures or dates to determine our survey dates? I'd say probably the temperatures,
Yeah.
especially like for first visit now with temperatures being all over the place. Like especially for the really explosive stuff like wood frogs. Like if it sometimes now in early March, it's like plus 20 for a few days and the wood frogs are going and you don't want to miss it. And if you were just doing dates, you'd miss it. So I'd say temperature is more important than dates for first visit, especially now that our weather is wacky.
I'm putting some old quizzes on that people can try on their own since apparently I can't figure out how to use the system today. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
And I see, Chris, you've commented that last year no frogs first visit and last year too. So that really makes it sound like those species that we target on the
Yeah,
first visit just aren't at that site. And that happens. That makes sense.
it does happen. Um, what else do I have here? Safety, which is some of the things I've discussed. Parking safely. I like to remind everybody to make sure you park safely, make sure you're visible, make sure people coming towards you see you. So I really recommend if you can afford it, um, just go to the dollar store and pick up a high safety vest. It's worth it. And any choice I have is going to cost more than it's going to cost you at the local store. We've had people ask about ticks, and I will share some stuff at the next meeting about it. I have some stuff, but I don't have in front of me. So I will make sure that is shared with everybody. But my thoughts are you can't undervalue tick checks and making sure everything's tucked in. And I know it's almost impossible in a marsh, but try to stay out of the long grass. Um, yeah. And if you do get a tick, follow the advice of your um, health unit, which in our area, if it's the tick has been on for more than 24 hours, you need to talk to a medical practitioner. Don't fool with this stuff. We're in an industry that both Doug and I know people who've gotten Lyme's disease. You the antibiotics are awful, but you do not want to go without the antibiotics. Doug, do you have anything like we're actually in a good spot and we've got 4 minutes left. So does
Yep.
anybody have any final questions or
I just want to answer one that I noticed that Teresa, you were asking about the Mills Block Lakehead Conservation Area. That I think that looks like it's in well within the Lake Superior watershed, so it would be fine. And just if some people are wondering, like, if you're really keen and you really want to survey a site that's just outside the watershed, we can still, like Kathy mentioned, we
yeah.
can still use data from sites that are just outside the watershed or even far outside the watershed for a bunch of other applications. It's just some things when it has to be actually physically within the Great Lakes watershed, it'll get excluded, but it's still useful. Like we would rather have stuff in the watershed, the Great Lakes watershed, proper if we can, and especially stations that have already been sampled in the past are highest priority. But if you really want to sample something outside, we've done it before and we can use it for lots of things.
And we have every route that comes in, we georeference it so we know exactly where it is. We identify how close it is to the coast. We identify if it's what's the word when it's associated with actually impacted by Great Lakes water.
Yep.
And we separate the ones that are directly impacted by the Great Lakes water versus ones that are in the watershed. So we have a lot of tools within our toolbox where we can identify every different idea and pull them into specialized surveys and stuff. And every marsh in the north is helpful because there's so few of them collected. One of that is that fewer marshes. Um, and other ones are, what do you mean by directly impacted? That means if there's water thing changes happening on the lake, it impacts the marsh. So like if there's a wave event or a flooding event that's happening right on the lake, that would affect what we call a coastal site.
Yeah, these what we call Great Lakes coastal marshes. The technical definition is that it's a wetland or marsh that has a direct water connection to one of the Great Lakes or its connecting river channels. So it might have a barrier beach, but if there's a breach in the beach and you've got water coming in, you've got a direct thing. It might be a marsh that's up a river mouth, but there's no falls, there's no rapids, so that fluctuating water levels on the Great Lakes are also fluctuating far enough up that river that that marsh is fluctuating in the same way as the actual lake is. So it's a direct connection to the fluctuating water levels that defines a coastal marsh. And some of these coastal marshes, like, think about Dunnville on the Grand River in southern Ontario. Some marshes are have a direct water connection to the lake, but they're like, a kilometer or more up the river, maybe even farther, some of them, before you get to the dam. Above the dam, no, that eliminates the direct water connection above that, so it's no longer a coastal marsh. But some of them can be quite far inland, and that's why, like Kathy said, we have to code each wetland individually. Like a person has to decide. 'Cause it's you can't really write an automated algorithm. Like it can't just be like anything farther than X distance is inland. No, you have to assess the water connection.
Some other great examples of coastal marshes are the I think it's the Echo Marsh Complex in Sault Ste. Marie. I think maybe one. I think there is also some along the Kaministiquia, if I'm pronouncing that right, in Thunder Bay. And I'm just doing that from memory. Something tells me that there's a gorgeous marsh up there that's really difficult to get at, but it's still up the river and directly connected to the lake. Um, so it's I could be totally wrong. It could be. I see so many maps. I could get this wrong, but those are the ones that people really, really associate with the Great Lakes. Another one would be Wymarsh. Yeah. Well, it is now 8:01. We've been here a whole hour. We can all go and watch a recording of the politicians now because we all know that it's been recorded. I don't mind staying on a couple more minutes if anybody else has some questions, or if you just want to mull this over, think it over, and send the questions later. I will save the recording, and I will share that with everybody afterwards. And um,
Yeah, sorry if we missed your question, or if you think of a question later, just send it to us. We'd be happy to try and answer it.
Yep. And thank you all for coming and talking to us tonight. It's nice talking to everybody.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yep. All right. All right. Night, everyone.
Take care.